moral heroes.
Exemplified the transformation in American abolition.
Inspirational.
The 1800s were a time of reform and change, but among numerous activists, Samuel Joseph May stands out for his unrelenting perseverance and incredible impact. Samuel Joseph May took a stand early on in history, aspiring to implement unabridged civil rights for all people across America during the early to mid-1800s. Using the Christian religion to broaden the audience, May's work and sermons attempted to extend and reform public education, advocate equal rights for women, and abolish slavery. May redefined the abolitionist movement, working to go beyond freeing slaves, aiming to eliminate prejudice. Born into a well-known Unitarian Boston family on September 12, 1797, May, a fantastic student, graduated from Harvard University in 1817 and continued his studies at Divinity School, going on to preach across the East Coast. In 1822, Samuel Joseph May started his journey of activism in a small but growing town known as Brooklyn, Connecticut, to serve as a minister against the wishes of his friends and family. When May arrived at the town filled with controversy, he was met with much contempt. However, May would go on to change Connecticut in large ways by starting a movement for educational reform. Although the state held an impressive reputation for their school system, May discovered deplorable conditions: supplies stuffed into 20 square feet without windows, schools built on swamps, and the wage of a teacher less than that of a common laborer. Only 5 years after his arrival in Connecticut, May held the first ever convention to improve the public education system in the United States. Despite successfully improving the teaching staff and hiring Connecticut's first professional female teacher, Cecilia Brooks, the majority of the population still did not believe in the cause for public education. Those rich enough simply sent their children to private school.
You cannot part with your own money for a better purpose than to educate your children. Explaining an education is the only way to ensure a child can succeed by learning the correct view of life, integrity, industry, benevolence, and piety.
He emphasized the importance of educating everyone, as anyone could rise to a position of power. By mid-century, when May was serving on many school boards, the legislature finally took action improving school conditions. However, unlike most educational reformers at the time, May firmly stood for the quality education for all children, white and black alike, and understood skin color did not mean mental inferiority. May founded Syracuse's new school system, New York's first fully integrated school system and only school system never to fully segregate, creating an example that inspired many other upstate cities. For the next 20 years, May traveled across the nation helping to pass the public school anti-discrimination statute, hiring the first ever Negro faculty member in the United States, and funding the Freedmen's Aid Society, an organization dedicated to ensuring quality education and fair treatment for free blacks. Garrett Smith even described him as
one of the most zealous and effective of clerical advocates in the new departures in the schools.
Very progressive at the time. I think by focusing on education, he was trying to get at the root of, the bigger social and civil rights problems, much bigger vision.
Samuel Joseph May was also responsible for helping to shape the antebellum women's rights movement. In 1836, May's attention was first brought to the unfair treatment of women when, after he gave an anti-slavery lecture, a woman said to him,
"That you do not apprehend how much of your description of the helpless dependence of slaves applies equally well to the condition of the whole female sex."
He states these words surprised and sickened him, instantly converting him to a women's rights advocate. A year later, May escorted the Grimke sisters, famous abolitionists and feminists, through southeastern Massachusetts during their speaking tour, even opening up his home to them.
And never will the nations of earth be well governed until both sexes, as well as parties, are fairly represented and have an influence, a voice, and if they wish, a hand in the enactment and administration of the laws.
May became one of the first ministers to preach on the behalf of women's rights, and his sermon, The Rights and Conditions of Women, was the first ever sermon focused on women's rights, spreading all the way to Great Britain, creating a foundation for women's rights around the world. His powerful words influenced men to acknowledge and act on the inequality, while empowering women to do so too. May worked closely with Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton by speaking at various women's rights conventions and helped to organize the first ever one in 1848 at Seneca Falls. He also publicly encouraged the election of Lucretia Mott. Samuel Joseph May's work in fighting for women's rights created a foundation for the suffrage movement that eventually led to the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920, granting women the right to vote. During May's career of activism, slavery was on the rise. The 100-year-old practice of taking black people from Africa and packing them onto ships to be auctioned off for labor in the United States, Britain, and other countries around the world was gaining popularity, about to reach the peak number of enslaved peoples ever. However, it was also facing opposition. Among this opposition was Samuel Joseph May. Although many obstacles lied in front of him and the dangers of preaching such equality, May took a stand for what was right. May originally did not see the need for immediate action until he saw slaves work in their horrid conditions and realized they were treated more like cattle than they were as like humans. May attended a series of lectures by William Lloyd Garrison and immediately adopted Garrisonian abolitionism, abandoning the idea of gradualism. Shortly thereafter, May delivered what would be the first of many sermons to focus on the wrongs of slavery, pointing out the moral flaws that went against the beliefs of Christianity, appealing greatly to a large Christian audience.
It is our own prejudice against the color of these people that make us consent the tremendous wrongs they are suffering.
When May first began publicly supporting immediate abolitionism, all those close to him regarded him as losing his mind, while those who only knew him by name lost all respect for him. Churches closed their doors, and publishers refused to accept his work. However, May persevered and acted against the Negro pew, where all blacks were forced to sit in the back of the church. By inviting a Negro family to sit in the front row and stating that a rich white slave owner should not be given more privileges in the church than a hard-working slave, as they are all children of God, he introduced racially integrated seating in churches. Although tensions were rising nearing the Civil War, and it was a dangerous time to preach abolitionism, with their effigies being burned in the streets, venues refusing to host anti-slavery meetings, and riots, sometimes even violent, erupting at meetings and during speeches, May still went on to participate in one of the most famous public demonstrations, the Jerry Rescue, where hundreds of people worked to break William McHenry, who was arrested under the Fugitive Slave Law, out of jail and bring him to May's home till it was safe to escape to Canada.
And as the Fugitive Slave Act dramatized the plight of runaway slaves, and incidents like the Jerry Rescue really have affected the conscience of many Northerners and sort of convinced them that if they did not speak out against slavery, they were comporting it with their silence, right? That they had a duty to do more than simply acquiesce as they had been doing it.
May also participated and founded multiple anti-slavery societies and built his New York home above a major Underground Railroad transit point to help shelter escaped slaves. His tireless work to help build the cause of abolition had eventually led to the ratification of the 13th Amendment, freeing slaves. May also redefined the abolitionist movement, stating their work would not be done till blacks and whites were equal, urging anti-slavery societies not to disband, and contributing to the 15th Amendment, giving black men the right to vote.
He was one of the few who understood that the end of legal slavery was not enough to truly free African Americans. And he also worked very actively in northern communities to ensure that African Americans had equal rights.
Samuel Joseph May took part in many other movements, including temperance, anti-war, Native American rights, economic equality, just rights for workers, and the Pennell movement. He used all his resources to help those in need, offering to give up his salary if donated directly to the poor, and paying legal fees for those unfairly tried. The movement Samuel Joseph May acted on early on of peace, women's rights, education reform, and racial equality still exist today, but have advanced incredibly thanks to Samuel Joseph May and others like him. And as Catherine L. Covert said, he spoke for common education in an age when rich sent their son to private schools and the poor went untaught. He was an abolitionist when slavery interests ran the country, a friend of women's rights when women were a household accessory, an unsung hero who worked among famous faces. an amazing activist who took a stand in history.